Hey guys, Zack here, and this is my review of Trollhunters Tales of Arcadia. Okay, so this episode, Bad Coffee, is notable for a number of reasons. First and foremost, this is kind of a Steve episode. This is an episode about how, essentially it's an episode with all the characters just kind of, bonding with the important adult figures in their life. So in this case, it would be, for the most part, because Toby has to bond with somebody that he has no real interest in. We'll get to that, but yeah, this is an episode where Jim bonds with Strickler. This is an episode where Steve bonds with Coach Lawrence, who is kind of his stepfather, and Eli bonds with Miss Janeth, who we find out is his favorite teacher in this episode. But so this episode is also kind of the episode where, unfortunately, we do have to say goodbye to Anton Yelchin. Unfortunately, he was the original voice of Jim for most of the first 3 seasons of this, but unfortunately, he passed away in a freak accident between part 2 and part 3, and so unfortunately, they had to recast him. It's unfortunate, and that he died, and there have been, I believe, numerous charities made in his honor. There were his death had an impact on he died in a vehicle accident, if you guys don't know. But there was this thing where but essentially what happened was he got out of his car. He went to go fiddle with the security gate, and the car model that he had didn't have a clear indicator for the light for the if it was in neutral or park. And so he got out, assuming it was in park. Turned out it was in neutral, and it ran him over. And tragically, that's what happened to him. Honestly, there's not a whole lot that I can say about that. It's tragic that he passed away, but and unfortunately now he has to be recast and replaced by Emil Hirsch. Although he did a great job, and there was a lot of episodes that he clearly loved doing. It's unfortunate that he didn't get to see the series finished, and that he had to be recast about halfway through because of a freak accident that got him killed. It's unfortunate, but it is a thing that happens. But in case this is an episode that is the first episode where Emil Hirsch voices Jim, and he does a pretty good job of it. He does a decent job of voicing Jim, and the way they explain it is definitely to be like, oh yeah, they had to recast him, so they tried to come up with this explanation for why he's no longer in the show. So yeah, I like the explanation. It works, but it is also tragic that this had to happen at all. It's just, this is an important episode for a number of reasons, is what I'm saying. But the big one being that unfortunately the original voice actor of Jim died and had to be recast. That's unfortunately you can't really get around that. And I've talked about this previously in other shows that I've reviewed. For example, I believe we've talked about Harlan Ellison. He voiced himself on Scooby-Doo Mystery Incorporated, which I reviewed, and he passed away, so he was only the handful of episodes that he was in. And then there's also, Eustace's mom from when we did Courage Month. Her voice actor passed away, so they subsequently retired her out of respect. There's unfortunately been a couple of instances of that, and there's honestly no way around it. It's just unfortunately he'll forever be immortalized in this. But unfortunately, people like Anton Yelchin, unfortunately there is no getting around death. You just have to deal with that. And that's unfortunately what happened. They just had to move on without him, but they did their best to honor his legacy in the process, and I kind of like that. Anyway, getting into the actual review now, because this is getting a little bit, I guess, sad. And unfortunately, I did not want to have to kind of bring this down, but I looked into this while I was reviewing this, and then I found out that, yeah, he unfortunately tragically passed away, and I was like, that's kind of sad. I need to talk about this when I get to that episode. And I did. But in any case, this episode does kind of continue with that. like the main episode, the main gimmick of the so we'll explain that in a minute. But in case the episode, getting into it, I guess, because I'm trying to just kind of wrap my head around it. The episode does open up with Claire, Darcy, and Darcy and Mary practicing in keeping with the whole Battle of the Bands thing that they're trying to prep for, which they decided to create a cover band of Papa Skull called Mama Skull, and we find out that they're terrible. Like, there's legitimately are practicing in Claire's basement, and we hear them singing and all that, and they're practicing their music, but then it cuts away randomly at one point to a guy walking along the street, and he immediately covers his ears and is visibly nauseous. So, and then also there's a dog howling because their song is bad as well. It's a whole bit where they're practicing their cover song and they just don't sound very good. But, of course, they're new at it, but still, it's a funny little gag. But, in any case, in the middle of the song, to this point, in the middle of the cover song, Claire, who is currently doing the vocals and playing one of the guitars, she winds up passing out after hearing a voice in her head saying that she is with her. At which point she passes out and wakes up in her living room with no clear memory of what happened. Darcy and Mary immediately carry her upstairs once they realize Claire is not okay. And they immediately pull her upstairs and ask what happened, pointing out that she passed away and passed out. And Claire, of course, tries to point out that she tries to play it off as just getting really into the music, and pointing out that she probably had to just sit out their session. But of course, but Mary immediately points out that Claire should probably skip out on school as well, noting that her nose is leaking an odd color fluid, and that is definitely not normal. And of course, we find out she is leaking something black from her nose. Like it's very visibly clear that Claire is not okay at this point. So, and of course, Claire, realizing that the right, does point out that maybe she should skip school and does lie down on her sofa, and while Mary and Darcy go to school and without her. Meanwhile, it's early morning. Jim is currently in the process of training with Strickler. And this is where they introduce the concept of how they explain they switched from Anton Yelchin to Emil Hirsch. Because Strickler introduces an object called grave sand, which is in a small coffee can, and as he explains it, is full of the ashes of fallen Gum soldiers, and that changelings use it to be able to freely switch between their human and troll forms, because it brings out their feral instincts, which means that they can become more in touch with their troll side and become their troll half. Whereas in humans, he proceeds to explain that it actually brings out their feral instincts, which makes them more troll-like, but it otherwise has no effect on humans. And it just brings out their troll-like instincts. And of course, Jim, asking how it works, Strickler proceeds to pull out a handful of it and blows it into Jim's face, which signals the transition from Anton Yelchin to Emil Hirsch. But in any case, from that point onward, Emil Hirsch voices Jim for the rest of the franchise. Like in every other episode after this point, where he's a major character, Anton Yelchin provides the voices. Except for Anton Yelchin provides. Actually, he's not completely gone. Anton Yelchin does provide, smaller stock noises and other things, similar to how Eustace Bagg was handled, because he also had because his voice actor, I believe, also passed away or retired or for whatever reason. Similarly to how Eustace Bagg was handled in Courage the Cowardly Dog, there's a new voice actor, but the original voice actor still provides a bunch of stock noises. So, Anton is not completely absent from the series from this point in terms of voice acting performances, but he doesn't voice anything major from this point onward, unfortunately and tragically. But, of course, Jim proceeds to immediately demonstrate his newfound trollish instincts, but, and just quickly demonstrates his ability to overpower both Strickler and Nomura. But unfortunately, right at that exact moment, Blinky has since gotten wind of what Jim has been doing and comes down with 2 trolls to investigate. And sure enough, when he discovers Jim is not acting like him, when he comes down, he quickly discovers that Jim is not acting like himself, but is also more visibly upset to point out that Nomura and Strickler are there. And of course, Strickler tries to reassure Blinky, pointing out that he's there to help Jim, but of course he points out that he proceeds to exclaims that Gunmar has escaped from the Darklands and has taken over Troll Market, and it's now that Strickler decides to show his face and climb out of whatever hole he was in. But of course, Nomura just insists that they're trying to help, and of course, we do find out that Jim is currently insisting that this is the only way to do it. And this is the Gravesand talking. He doesn't actually think this, but the Gravesand effectively makes Jim go, I need to get rid of my humanity and become like Gunmar in order to fight him. And that's what the Gravesand is helping me do. But it's very clear that the influence of the Gravesand is just making him say that, and he's not actually thinking that way. And of course, Blinky is of course curious as to what exactly it is that has gotten into Jim. At which point he stubs his toe on the crane of Gravesand, mutters a "what the hell" under his breath, and scoops it up while immediately recognizing that it's Gravesand, and realizing what Strickler and Nomura have done, yells at both of them, pointing out that Gravesand is not meant to be consumed by humans because it can cause a lot of long-term problems. And of course, Jim is insisting that it's the only way it's shedding his humanity. But it's this point where Blinky proceeds to plead with Jim, pointing out that this isn't him, and that he needs to remember why the amulet chose him, because of his humanity. And of course, after getting through for Jim points out that he doesn't know what he was thinking, and ultimately he's broken of the influence of the Gravesand, but his voice is permanently altered because of what happened to the Gravesand. And Blinky does note that Jim's voice is different. He does note that at first, and of course his voice will be different for the rest of the series because it's a different guy. But of course, to this point where he proceeds to scold Strickler and Nomura, and Strickler just kind of doubles down, pointing out that this is the way Jim needs to beat Gunmar, pointing out that Gunmar is unfortunately too powerful for Jim, and that's in order to defeat, and that his humanity could make him weak and a liability. But of course Blinky argues back that no, he couldn't be, because he points out that obviously Jim's there's a right way and a wrong way to do it, and Jim is currently doing it the wrong way. He points out that Jim inhaling Gravesand is not a good idea, but also points out that they'll definitely have to take their chances, but especially since he now knows that he points out that there's something far more worrying that he needs to bring up. That's the Gravesand. In addition to the Gravesand thing, he does bring up that unfortunately Gunmar has left Troll Market thanks to according to Arg's reconnaissance, and now realizing that he's no longer in Troll Market. Nomura reasons that he must still be trying to revive the Eternal Night, but also points out that it's just a fairy tale, and that there's a very low chance that he's actually going to find anything. But which of course causes Strickler to point out that that's all the more reason that he needs to continue to train Jim, pointing out that if he does bring about the Eternal Night, that Jim might not be able to stop it on his own. But of course, Blinky points out that they'll just take their chances and escort Jim out so that he can get ready go through his morning routine and get ready for school. And sure enough, Jim does that. He proceeds to make himself and his mom a sandwich for lunch before coming downstairs to try and find his mom because he's currently trying to look for her. And sure enough, she's in the basement. She hollers to him, and he of course has the Gravesand with him still. Like, he carries it around in his backpack on the off chance he needs it. But he carries it around. He sees it on the floor. He sees he sets it on the floor as he comes down the stairs. And sure enough, discovers that Barbara's memories are still coming back in full force. And is currently painting a new piece that of course Jim is very much concerned about, because it's Strickler in his troll form. And she proceeds to explain that she ultimately painted him to be symbolic of the monster that she now realizes that he is, which, of course, pointing out that Jim was right about him, about how he abandoned her, didn't even once call, and of course is now visibly upset and wants nothing to do with him. But of course, Jim is disturbed about the fact that that's her ultimate reasoning. But he's visibly disturbed that her memories are continuing to come back, and she has successfully sketched Strickler as a troll. But ultimately concludes that it looks very pretty, and he does. He tries to play it off as it looking pretty, and he likes the artistic choices before ultimately running off to go to school while Barbara just admires her work. But in case Jim proceeds to come into the school and does wonder, and of course they do want, and he and Toby do proceed to have a conversation about Claire, about how Claire is isn't in school because she's still not feeling well, and of course they're wondering how something could possibly be happening. We're pointing out that it's been several weeks since she's had that cold, and it still hasn't gone away, which worries them. But they do point out that it'll just take time to get out of her system, and that they just need to be patient. But in any case, they then proceed to walk in on a conversation between Coach Lawrence and Steve. And of course, Coach Lawrence is trying to connect with Steve at school, pointing out that his mom is not going to be home, so he's considering ordering pizza, and of course Steve is trying to play it off as the whole idea that I don't want you talking about this in public. Please stop. Like that is essentially Steve's entire relationship with Coach Lawrence at this point. Like Steve, his not dad keeps bringing up the fact that he's dating his mom, and he's obviously not comfortable about talking about that in public. And of course, Coach Lawrence then proceeds to tell him to hug it out, pointing out that he knows it's a little awkward and uncomfortable, but he does pull him into a hug. At which point, Jim and Toby come around the corner, and they are obviously very visibly, a little bit confused, and do kind of give a little bit of a cough to kind of signal that they're there. At which point, Steve breaks it off with Coach Lawrence and tells Coach Lawrence that he's not his dad and that they needs to stop acting like it. And of course, this causes Coach Lawrence to become hurt and runs off to the teacher's lounge. Meanwhile, Steve tells them that tells Jim and Toby that whatever it is they thought they saw, they better best forget it. At which point he shoves past them, but in the process, Jim winds up dropping his can of grave sand, which of course causes them to become, which of course he admits that he needs to get back because of what it can do. And Toby, having been briefed on it, proceeds to cover Jim while he goes into the teacher's lounge to try and sneak the can of grave sand. And of course, it's because it's in a coffee can. Jim initially thinks that it's the one on the counter that the teachers are currently using. Of course, it doesn't wind up being, and that winds up being a source of conflict for the episode. But of course, Jim proceeds to sneak in, and we then proceed to hear all of the teachers talking about their various issues and problems. Of course, we find out that Coach Lawrence proceeds to bring up that he just was trying to connect with his future son-in-law, and he doesn't understand why his son is so closed off from him. And meanwhile, Miss Janeth points out that she, as a teacher, is trying to make it different, but points out that nobody actually listens to her or talks to her or actually wants to listen to what she has to say, and more often than not, she puts people to sleep. And finally, we have Senior Uhl, who vents about the fact that the kids in school have no discipline, mentioning the one time that they stole his truck and quote unquote poisoned him with a Diablo Maximus burrito, and of course at this point where Toby proceeds to give his distraction while Jim sneaks away the can of coffee, unaware that he's not actually stealing the grave sand, because they both look like a can of coffee. But of course believing that initially they believe that Jim just ran off with their coffee and are pulling some sort of prank, but then see the actual can of grave sand on the floor, and Coach Lawrence, believing it's just a normal can of coffee and believing it just fell off the counter and rolled onto the floor, picks it up and makes coffee with it. And of course, we do see him drink the coffee, which causes him to go into during one of his gym classes, which causes him to go in a completely feral and wild state. Sure enough, he's a lot more verbally abusive than he normally is, and constantly tries to scold everybody. Tries to constantly scold everybody into doing better and bringing their A game. And of course, Jim, Toby, and Steve all observe this. And ultimately, the thing that causes Steve to kind of step in and tell Coach Lawrence to back down is when he starts picking on Eli and calling him a worm, which of course Steve, being secret best friends with Eli, takes great offense to, and does come to his friend's behalf, telling him to back off. And of course, Coach Lawrence is upset with Steve. He proceeds, under the influence of the gravesand, he has a visual verbal tick every time he speaks, but because of how the gravesand is affecting him. But he then proceeds to tell Steve that he proceeds to tell Steve that he doesn't like his attitude very much, and admits that if it wasn't for his mom, he would have sent him away to military school a long time ago. And of course, this causes Steve to become upset, mainly because of what Coach Lawrence said to him, but also because of him bringing up the fact that they're dating in front of everyone. And this, of course, causes Steve to become visibly angry, telling Coach Lawrence that he swore he wouldn't tell anybody. And of course, he then proceeds to. And of course, Coach Lawrence proceeds to point out that it doesn't really matter because he's not really his son. Why should he care? This, of course, causes Steve to just kind of lash out at Coach Lawrence and tells him that he hates him before storming off. And obviously very visibly confused as to what could have possibly happened, Jim then proceeds to posit a theory. And sure enough, after gym class, they proceed to go to the locker room, and they proceed to open up their can of coffee. And sure enough, Jim discovers it's actually coffee, much to his fear, because he now realizes what happened to Coach Lawrence. And of course, Steve and Eli walk into the locker room shortly after them, and of course Jim admits out loud to Toby that he may have that their coffee may have been spiked with gravesand, which of course causes Steve to immediately become concerned and also confrontational with Jim, insisting to know what Jim did and what happened. And of course, Jim admits that it was an accident, but also points out that Coach Lawrence may have accidentally eaten something that made him become a troll. So made him act like a troll. And of course, we find that Coach Lawrence is currently digging through the bins of vaudeville equipment and other things, sports equipment and other things, and popping balls with his bare hands and then eating them, which of course is disturbing. Like that's the entire thing. Everybody under the influence of the gravesand is visually disturbing, but ultimately they do proceed. Steve proceeds to wonder what exactly it is they're supposed to do, and Jim, immediately realizing that he possibly has a solution to their problem, immediately calls Strickler, much to Steve and Eli's surprise. And sure enough, he calls Strickler until he immediately calls Strickler, who is currently trying to sneak up on Barbara to kind of apologize to her, but also is he's kind of just spying on her from the bushes, because he knows that he can't see her because she most likely hates him. But and especially after what happened, where he just effectively more or less dropped off the face of the earth. Like he's trying to keep a low profile, but ultimately he gets a call from Jim, has to immediately silence it because his mom is literally right there. And of course Jim proceeds to tell Strickler about what happened, about how someone ingested gravesand. They make up the idea that it's a cat, which of course Coach Lawrence overhears the conversation, and believing there's an actual cat becomes invisibly hungry and starts trying to hunt Toby. So of course Jim tries to speed through the conversation while Coach Lawrence slowly stalks up on them. And then proceeds to ask them what would happen if somebody were to ingest somebody, namely a quote-unquote cat, were to ingest gravesand. And of course, first and foremost, Strickler says not to ingest it because it increases the abilities, it amplifies the effects tenfold. But also points out that if someone did eat it, they would have to be put down, which of course Jim points out isn't an option and wonders if there's another way to draw somebody out of it. And of course, Strickler proceeds to point out that Senior Uhl, if somebody were to get under the effects of it, they would need to be emotionally connected with. Although he admits that he doesn't really have any idea how someone would emotionally connect with a cat. He openly admits that. He has no idea how somebody would actually pull that off. But of course, Jim then proceeds to thank Strickler for his time and hangs up. Much to his confusion, because he has no idea what Jim's actual call was about, and that way ends up playing into the episode as well. But ultimately, after hanging up, Strickler gives a side-eyed glance to Barbara, is very visibly apprehensive about going up and talking with her, and then he resolves himself and leaves. Which it's just very sad. Like, he obviously did love her, but he can't talk to her anymore. That's the unfortunate part. Like their relationship, he did actually care for her when he was, pretending to date her to get under Jim's skin, but he did wind up actually developing genuine affection for her, which is a major thing, but that is part of his character now. But in case once Coach Lawrence does wind up sneaking up on the kids, they immediately try to lock him in the locker room, and at which point they talk with Darcy and Mary, who come by, and Darcy and Toby greet each other and start talking with each other. But of course, this is this point where Darcy proceeds to explain that Toby, that's obvious that they've been having issues with some of the other teachers as well, which of course causes Jim and the rest of the group to become concerned and wonder different how. Of course, they find out that Miss Janeth has started doing a bunch of weird, not very teacher-like things, and Senior Uhl has ultimately fallen suit as well. He's been very visibly out of it, but of course, pointing out that they now have to have in their next class with Senior Uhl. They're not very visibly happy with the idea that they have to now change teachers. But Jim real quickly realizes that it is in fact the issue that the rest of the teachers must have gotten a dose of gravesand as well. And in addition to Coach Lawrence, they're going to need to split up to try and reconnect with everybody. But they do need to figure out how to get everybody out of school. And of course, Jim immediately suggests that they call Claire and have her make a portal to pull everybody out. But when he can't get through to her, he immediately just resolves on a plan B and wonders if anybody has one. At which point Toby points out that he was saving this idea for when it was the President's Fitness Day, but concludes that that'll be a much more effective here. At which point he sneaks into the principal's office, calls everybody calls over the intercom about how there's free taco day and there's a chocolate truck outside, and that immediately causes everybody to immediately flee from the school, except for the teachers. And of course everybody falls for it hook, line, and sinker, thinking that there's actually tacos. At which point Toby closes the gate to the school to keep everybody else from coming in. And of course Darcy is insisting that her boyfriend let her in when she sees him close the gates, but then realizes that that's a stupid idea, pointing out that why she would be arguing to get back into school. And they proceed to leave, and her and the rest of the students proceed to leave to go and find the taco truck, which doesn't exist, but they don't know that. But in any case, once after everybody has been closed in, Strickler actually arrives at the school and immediately encounters Miss Janeth, who he notes is in fact acting odd. And sure enough, he proceeds to talk with her when she points out that she hasn't seen him in a while and is obviously acting differently. And he proceeds to point out that he got a call from Jim, but points out that Jim wasn't entirely truthful with him, so he just proceeded to come and investigate. At which point, Senior Uhl proceeds to knock him out, and they proceed to give him a dose of gravesand as well. And now that they know that the school is secure, Jim, Toby, Steve, and Eli regroup and point out that now that everybody's secure, they know that the only people in the school are the teachers. So they immediately realize that they need to just figure out a game plan from there. But then discover that Strickler's in the school as well, and he proceeds to talk over the intercom about how undisciplined undisciplined Jim is, he's only trying to teach him, but ultimately points out that if he's going to screw in his teachings, then he might as well not even bother. Which of course causes Jim to realize that Strickler isn't acting like himself either, and must have gotten a dose of gravesand. And now realizing they need to split up, Jim proceeds to give everybody an assignment on for which teacher they need to emotionally connect with to bring them out of their gravesand mental state. Of course, Steve has chosen to go bond with Coach Lawrence to bring him out. Strickler decides to go after Jim decides to go after Strickler personally. Eli has chosen to go and talk with Miss Janeth, and much to Toby's chagrin, he has to go bond with Senior Uhl, which he admits he's not particularly fond of doing, because he points out that as according to himself, Uhl has no emotions to emotionally connect with. So, but of course, everybody proceeds to split up. Jim, of course, immediately dons his armor once he sees Strickler, who is currently hanging out on the roof in the main sidewalk. And of course, Strickler immediately tells Jim that it's time to continue their education. And of course, Jim of course dons his armor to defend himself, and asks why Strickler even came back in the first place. Strickler proceeds to point out that actually he didn't come back for Jim, and proceeds to insist that he came back because he believes that Jim is too weak to be Gunmar, and points out that either one will kill the other and the foolish charade together, at which point they start fighting. Meanwhile, Coach Steve runs into Coach Lawrence in the gym. Coach Lawrence is currently swinging around on the pull-up rope by like a monkey, and of course Steve tries to emotionally connect with Coach Lawrence, but Coach Lawrence doesn't have any interest in emotionally connecting with Steve at this point, and proceeds to rip the climbing rope out of the ceiling and uses it as a whip to try and attack Steve with. And of course, Steve, realizing that if that's how they want to play it, that he's more than happy to reciprocate, and then tells Coach Lawrence to bring it on. Meanwhile, and then Eli goes to the theater where he discovers Miss Janeth is currently climbing around and is reciting what is it? She's currently reciting play lines at Eli, while also trying to drop various fixture equipment on top of him, like sandbags, stage lighting, those kinds of things. And she almost nearly crushes Eli more than once. And Eli realizes he's in way over his head and tries to flee. And then finally we have Senior Uhl, who Toby immediately tries to connect with, but can't find a common ground to connect with Senior Uhl on because he has no idea what Senior Uhl likes. So, of course, Toby just kind of flounders for a little bit. He has no idea how to actually connect with Senior Uhl. Like Senior Uhl is just kind of attacking, and also creepily speaking in tongues because he's a language teacher. He speaks in it's creepy because he's speaking Spanish. But the way the voice actor goes off on it, he just sounds genuinely creepy. It's kind of cool. But ultimately, the first person to actually connect with their teacher is Eli. Of course, he winds up getting grabbed and picked up and tormented by Miss Janeth, who again starts reciting Shakespeare and other plays. But Eli proceeds to respond the exact lines back to her, and continues the line she's speaking, pointing out that and ultimately concludes that he's not going to slay his favorite teacher, which does enable him to emotionally connect with her when she realizes that Eli thinks she's his favorite teacher. She does ultimately back down, and he winds up dipping her in the library as well, in the auditorium as well. But then she's visibly confused as to why she's being dipped in the school auditorium, and she proceeds to explain that the world is their stage, at which point he immediately accidentally drops her because it's Eli. But in case with Miss Janeth officially dealt with, Eli proceeds to go and help Toby, who is obviously, as I mentioned, he's struggling to find a common grounds to connect with Senior Ul with, because he has no idea what Senior Ul likes. And of course he's in the midst of almost killing Toby by pinning him against the wall. So of course Eli immediately jumps on the Senior Ul's head to distract him. And at which point they try to figure out what they try to figure out together. Eli immediately admits that that's a mistake, by the way, but they try to figure out together how they can actually connect with Senior Ul. And ultimately what happens is Eli remembers that Senior Ul really likes his truck, so there's just an extended funny little sequence of them doing exactly that, pointing out that Senior Ul really likes his truck and needs to bond with it, and just tries to be like, your car is smiling just for you. She's got a few dents in her bumper, but those are dimples. And obviously she has this great finish. Oh, and all these other, truck-related things that eventually causes Senior Ul to snap out of it, and that is just really funny. And also Senior Ul has visibly no idea what happened. But finally, Steve proceeds to try and bond with Coach Lawrence, finally bond with Coach Lawrence, and of course Steve is currently struggling, especially since he's at a disadvantage because Coach Lawrence is using the climbing rope like a whip, as I mentioned. But ultimately Steve managed to catch it and wrap it around himself, and realizing there's no other way around it, does finally decide to have an honest conversation with Coach Lawrence about how he meant what he said this morning about how Coach Lawrence isn't his father, because as he goes on to explain, his father kind of sucks. Like, his father he openly admits that his father has never been around, was never there to support him or his mom, and of course admits that Coach Lawrence is better than his dad because he's the guy who actually stuck around to help him out, and this of course causes him to admit that he may not be his father, but he is his friend. And he does appreciate everything that he does for him and his mom. And this of course causes Coach Lawrence to, and he then proceeds to respond by pointing out that they're gonna hug it out, which causes Coach Lawrence to finally snap out of his gravesand-induced state, and does pull his technically not son into a loving embrace, and before immediately breaking it off because it's awkward and they have no idea what the context of that is. But Steve bonds with his technically not father in this episode, but it's very great. But ultimately, meanwhile Jim is currently trying to fight off against Strickler, and he openly admits that he's not entirely sure why Strickler came back, but then realizes why Strickler actually came back. It's not to train Jim, and he just finally admits it to himself, but it's to protect Barbara, because he realizes that Barbara wants to protect Barbara and make sure she's safe. And of course Strickler insists that Barbara doesn't even remember who he is, so how could he possibly keep her safe? At which point Jim openly admits that yes, Barbara does secretly love Strickler, pointing out that memories did come back of him, and she is hurt that he left. So she's and openly admits that to both to Strickler, but also to himself, as he admits it was something that he personally needed to hear. But of course, after admitting that his mom does love Strickler primarily to himself, Jim is able to get Strickler to back down and return to normal. And this causes Jim to become happy that Strickler is fine, but admits that it was something that he personally needed to hear. But in any case, the rest of the kids then proceed to reconvene where Strickler was, and they proceed to point out that they've done it, they've broken everybody out of their gravesand state, but also admit that unfortunately they now have a bunch of confused teachers who need answers. And Strickler proceeds to point out that he'll take it from there, pointing out that he'll probably be able to explain it to them. At which point he does thank Jim, pointing out that this was a good learning opportunity for both of them. At which point he leaves. At which point they do point out the group does point out that they'll probably need to message Claire and let her know what happened. But Jim just points out that Claire is just kind of lucky that she missed out on this one. But then we find out why she missed out on this one. So the episode that proceeds to end with Gunmar arriving at the Spirit's Hollow, which is the location where Morgana has been primarily seen. and he does meet with her, and pointing out that he's come to seek the information on the Eternal Knights, and of course Morgana then proceeds to point out that he may be here, but wonders why he's there and what she should possibly give it to him, and give him what he wants. And Mark proceeds to continue, pointing out that he knows they want the same thing, to drive humans from the surface lands. And of course, Morgana then proceeds to reveal herself, and also reveals that if he wants the secret to the Eternal Night, that she will happily give it to him. But she also uses they, which of course confuses Gunmar for a minute. At which point she explains that her child and her champion will help guide the way. At which point they toss the head of Anger Rod at his feet, and he picks it up, and obviously very visibly confused. Morgana then proceeds to explain that he will be reborn and be his guide. At which point the episode ends. So yeah. Obviously, as I explained in detail at the beginning of this is the episode where Emil Hirsch officially takes over for the voice of Jim, following Anton Yelchin's untimely demise. Unfortunately, he did pass away way too soon. That is unfortunately just a thing that happens sometimes. I don't really there's nothing it's unfortunate that happened. Yes, but the best you can do is move on from it and just honor the legacy, and that's what happened here. Emil Hirsch did a good job of replacing him. Doing a good job of trying to keep the spirit of who Jim is supposed to be alive for him, kind of like a passing of the torch type thing in this episode. But also, this episode is about them emotionally connecting with a lot of the different people. Jim admits to himself that Strickler and his mom did love each other, and he now understands that. Because that was something he apparently struggled with for the longest time. But also, Coach Lawrence and Steve had a talking out where they finally admitted that Coach Lawrence is better than Steve's dad, actually, and that Steve is regretful for hurting him, and now they have a much closer bond than they did, which is great. And then also the funny thing where Senior Ul is brought out of his trance by his truck, and that is hilarious. But in any case, that is going to do it for my review today. So what don't you guys think? Let's get a discussion in the comment section down below, or over on my Discord server, link in the description. Anyway, thank you guys so much for watching. If you enjoyed, be sure to like, comment, and subscribe. Also be sure to follow me on Twitter in the description below. Be sure to check out my Patreon in the description below as well. It's only a couple bucks a month. It does really help me out. And you guys get access to a bunch of cool perks, and I'm my way of saying thanks, so please go check this out. Again, link is down in the description. Please go do that. And also be sure and go check out my Twitch. I stream Saturdays and Sundays. Please go check that out. I would appreciate that. Be sure to go and check out my Discord. Link is down in the description as well. I would appreciate that. We hang out there sometimes. I do watch along sometimes. Please go check those out. I would appreciate it. And finally, if you want to see more content from me, then be sure to check out the videos linked in the end screen. The top video is the most recent video. It may or may not be this video. Whereas the bottom video is a video recommended to you based on what you've already seen from me. So if you want to try something new, or see more of what you like, then be sure to check both of those videos out. But in any case, thank you guys so much for watching. Until next time, we'll see you guys in the next video. Peace!